Joining us now from New York is Eva Golinger. She's an attorney, author, and was an advisor to the late Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez. Eva, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The current Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says he had to close the border because the area had been infiltrated by what he called paramilitaries, criminal gangs, and smugglers. Do you believe that to be the case, or is there an element of politics here, given that these two countries have not always had good relations?
Well, actually, I know in fact for it to be the case because I've been to that area. I lived in that area for about a 5-year period a while back, but still, it's always been known as an area with a significant level of paramilitary violence that's spilled over across the border. You know, Venezuela and Colombia share a very long border. It's over 2,000 kilometers long, and most of it is jungle. I mean, it's pretty much a lawless territory. In fact, both of the presidents, both Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela and President Juan Manuel Santos of Colombia, have admitted that there's a lack of government control over a large part of that border area. So it's really been, escalating over the past few years, especially as the situation in Venezuela has changed. And as we know, and a lot of this has surfaced not just from the infiltration of Colombian paramilitaries into Venezuela, therefore causing violence, but also this whole issue going on with the smuggling and the contraband of products that in Venezuela are available at very low prices, subsidized by the government. And that's become a huge, multi-million-dollar business for a lot of these organized crime groups. But I do know, for example, that there are some of those border towns on the Venezuelan side that have come under the control of Colombian paramilitary forces to the extent where, they charge them, well, it's basically extortion. They charge them a price to be able to provide what they say is protection. They impose curfews. They impose all kinds of very strict laws on the people, and people basically live under a reign of terror. So for my opinion, personally, I think it's high time that something is being done to try to control that area and, reduce that level of crime and violence that's been occurring over the past few decades.
Right, and something is being done right now. The borders have been closed, and that's led to a humanitarian crisis. Thousands of people have been affected by this. People have also been deported from Venezuela back into Colombia, people who have jobs in Venezuela, who have to support families in Venezuela. Should these border crossings not be opened, at least for humanitarian reasons?
Well, first of all, I think that that's erroneous because most of the people that were outright deported were in Venezuela legally. Most of them were basically what they were doing is living a sort of a transitory life back and forth on the border. And most of them have admitted to the fact that what they were living off was not legitimate jobs in Venezuela. They were living off buying subsidized products cheap in Venezuela that are primarily made available to the Venezuelan people, but of course also foreign residents who live there. But mainly obviously for legitimate purposes. What most of those people in the border region live off is buying the subsidized products, bringing them across the border into Colombia, and selling them at, 1,000 times more. I mean, we're not talking about just a small profit they're making. They're making huge profits. And one of the biggest products that is used for smuggling and contraband is gasoline, petrol. In Venezuela, it's always been subsidized by the government. It's an outrageously cheap price. For example, you could fill the tank of an SUV for less than $1 or 50 cents these days. So they're buying it in Venezuela and they're selling it in Colombia, making, a profit of 2,000 or 3,000 times what they've purchased it for. So, I mean, the people that have been deported, the people that have voluntarily departed Venezuela did not have legal status in the country. Most of them had invaded territory. They were squatters on Venezuelan land. They had built makeshift homes that were not stable in any way. And they were living off of basically contraband. And, it was affecting severely not just Venezuela's economy, but also the safety and security of the Venezuelan people. So personally, I think it's unfortunate that this has happened. But, the Colombian government has come out right. The president, in fact, said, President Juan Manuel Santos just said in a speech that his country's doing much better than Venezuela, that they're one of the top economies in the region. So I think he should be welcoming with open arms back all those Colombians that over the years have fled Colombia because of the violence and the impoverished conditions. What's the problem now with them coming back home? I think that it's a perfect time for Colombia to receive its people back and help provide them jobs and homes in their own country.
What will you say to critics who say that what Venezuela has done, it has already declared a state of emergency, but what President Maduro has done is to deflect attention away from Venezuela's serious economic problems?
Well, I mean, that's a just a criticism of what's happening in the country. Obviously, there is an economic crisis. It's not all because of the contraband going into Colombia, but we are talking about a significant amount of products being smuggled out of the country. We're talking about 40%, according to government figures, of Venezuelan products nationwide are being smuggled out. Again, this is a huge multi-million-dollar business. So I think that is a legitimate issue in the country. At the same time, there's a currency problem, and the Colombian border contributes to that, because on the Colombian side, they elevate the price of. There's a whole currency scheme, and so they're filtering currency out of Venezuela, dollars, all kinds of things. I mean, it's really a lawless area that needs to be controlled. And I just want to add that Venezuela over the past half century has received millions of Colombians that have fled the civil war in their country. Colombia is actually number 2 worldwide, of the number of displaced people, and that's from the violence in their own country. And Venezuela has always been the country that's borne the brunt of Colombia's civil war. So it's not as though all of a sudden Venezuela is treating Colombians poorly. I mean, Venezuela has received Colombians, and according to figures inside Venezuela, there are over 5 million Colombians that do reside in Venezuela, that receive Venezuelan services, that are not subjected to what's happening in the border region. But I think that it's a legitimate concern that there's an economic crisis in Venezuela, but let's see what happens. Will closing down partially the border on the Colombian side in any way improve Venezuela's economic conditions? I mean, we're just talking about a border closure that's occurred over the past 2 weeks. So I think that we still have to wait and see how this will impact Venezuela's economy. Will there be more products available in the country to Venezuelans that have been smuggled out to Colombia over the past few years, and will it make a difference on people's daily lives? I think that's what matters most of all.
Now, we have Brazil and Argentina, which are both trying to mediate a solution to this crisis. Do you believe they have any chance of diffusing the crisis, of coming to some kind of settlement?
Actually, Ecuador's foreign minister was just in Venezuela this week and met with the president, and also met with Venezuela's foreign minister to try to negotiate some kind of dialogue, or mediate a dialogue between both Presidents Santos and Maduro. And it looks as though they're going to get there. Both have said that they're open to dialogue. They want to do that. They want to find a diplomatic solution. But I mean, the bottom line here is that Colombia has said, I mean, their officials, the president, the foreign minister, and others have said that they're not going to change any of their laws and their regulations on the border. And so it makes it really difficult for Venezuela to find a solution, because a lot of the problem is on the Colombian side, where they actually legalize the contraband, they legalize the currency schemes inside Colombia, so it provides incentive for people to continue doing that. I mean, I think that it's an important moment for both countries to decide if they should have more border controls. I think that would be completely legitimate under international law. They have an incredibly fluid, open border, and it's obviously not working for Venezuela. Colombians, in fact, have admitted, the Colombian government and the border town of Cucuta on the Colombian side have admitted that they live off of Venezuela. So, Venezuela is suffering economically. They really don't need another country to be living off of them, especially when that other country is freely admitting that they have one of the most prosperous economies in the region. So I think that, Colombia has a lot of responsibility here, just as Venezuela does, and that they need to find a solution where both of them are going to take responsibility and find a way to control that border area so it's not affecting Venezuela's economy.